In the past few years, we have seen some of the biggest names in entertainment taken down. Canceled. When their past bad behavior has been made more public for the world to see and to be disgusted with. You already know all their names. They are the usual suspects of perversion. People like Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey, and Bill Cosby have all felt the wrath and the punishment for the years of unchecked, horrendous, abusive behavior finally coming to light. For some, they take a brief hiatus and return almost more popular than ever. I'm looking at you, Louis C.K. For others, they never quite bounce back from the horrendous allegations. We also have to ask the question, is it possible to separate the art from the horrible person who is the artist? An artist filled with sin. Or after the horrendous behavior is exposed, is it hard to watch their movies again? Every case is different, and that is why we must look at this particular case. This time, it's a cinema darling who everyone had so much hope for. This dude helped create and destroy the modern-day superhero movie. But yeah, so now this filmmaker is on the line himself of those usual suspects. So what the f*** happened to Bryan Singer? But to truly understand what the f*** happened to Bryan Singer, we must begin at the beginning, and the beginning began when he was born on his birthday, 1965, New York City. Making films was a passion of his from an early age, where he would make 8mm films while attending high school in New Jersey, before heading off to college where he studied filmmaking at the School of Visual Arts in New York. Then he was transferred over to the famed USC School of Cinematic Arts. Shortly after college, Bryan Singer would direct a short film called Lion's Den, which featured his childhood friend Ethan Hawke, and would be edited by future Academy Award winner John Ottman. His short film, Lion's Den, would prove to be a successful endeavor, as after a screening of the film, a Japanese-based production company approached him about funding his next movie. This would lead to 1993's Public Access, which Bryan Singer co-wrote with future Oscar winner Christopher McQuarrie. Despite winning the Sundance Film Festival Grand Jury Prize, the $250,000 budgeted film never secured a theatrical release. With the critical success of his first feature-length film, Bryan Singer would found his production company Bad Hat Harry Productions. It's an homage to Steven Spielberg's classic film Jaws, when he says, "That's a bad hat, Harry." And the first project by this production company would be House MD, which would list Bryan Singer as executive producer for all 176 episodes. Of course, it was his first film under this production company that would truly launch him into the upper echelon of filmmakers. The idea for this film came from the famous line in the movie Casablanca, when the character says, "Round up the usual suspects." Singer always thought that would be a great title for a movie, with the image of a police lineup in his head for the poster. So he had the poster first, now he just needed a movie. All he really had to do was figure out what would bring 5 notorious felons into one single lineup. Luckily, Christopher McQuarrie had an unpublished screenplay that he was able to fuse together with Bryan Singer's idea, and The Usual Suspects was born. The film would release in August 1995, where it would garner strong critical acclaim and an even better box office, pulling in over $67 million off a $6 million budget. The film had an amazing cast, which was so well directed. The dialogue was fresh and fun, like dialogue used to be in the 90s. And the violence was hip and cool, like how violence used to be in the 90s. But yeah, when watching The Usual Suspects, you could feel like you were in the hands of a very capable filmmaker, and you just couldn't wait to see what he was gonna do next. And yeah, like I said, these Usual Suspects, they made a lot of money at the box office, and even more impressive than that money was the legacy that this film left behind, as it has one of the best twist endings of all time. And it would go on to be nominated for over 50 awards, including 2 Academy Award wins for Kevin Spacey.
Well, whoever Kaiser Soze is, I can tell you he's going to get gloriously drunk tonight.
And the screenplay, while Bryan Singer would receive nominations for Best Film at the British Academy Film Awards and Best Director at the Saturn Awards. Bryan Singer was the #1 hotshot director in showbiz at the time. And this was the 90s, during a time when young hotshot directors were all the rage. Everyone thought that his future was bright, but we would sadly discover that those days of future passed him over because of horrible things. But yeah, we'll get to those horrible things in a little bit. Now back to movies. His next movie would be Apt Pupil. Bryan Singer had read the Stephen King novella of the same title, Apt Pupil, when little Bryan Singer was only 19 years old, and he had always wanted to make it into a movie. He got a screenwriter to type up a script and presented it to Stephen King, along with a copy of The Usual Suspects, which hadn't been released yet, and Stephen King was so impressed with the script and the movie Usual Suspects that he optioned the rights to Bryan Singer for just $1. Unfortunately, the film Apt Pupil was not a big hit with audiences, only recouping around $9 million of its $14 million budget. But it would bring him his second Saturn Award nomination for Best Director, while the film would win a Saturn Award for Best Horror Film. And he got to work with Ian McKellen, which he would do again in his next movie. But of course, those films with their critical acclaim meant bigger opportunities for Bryan Singer. And he would take the biggest leap of his career when he tackled X-Men in the year 2000. A film that is credited with ushering in the modern-day comic book movie revolution, if you don't count Blade. Bryan Singer said that he was looking to do a science fiction film at the time, and was actually offered a chance to direct Alien Resurrection, but was ultimately convinced to take on the X-Men movie after the producers explained to him the themes of the X-Men film that they were trying to make. And these themes involved people being prejudiced against others for simply being who they are, something that Singer could relate to because his sexual orientation is bisexual, in case you were wondering. And so yeah, Bryan Singer took experiences he had, feeling like an outsider, feeling like he doesn't belong in the world, and used that very effectively to direct the X-Men movie. Just like with The Usual Suspects, he was handling an ensemble cast, balancing them all very well. The action is solid, and the suspense and the tension and the drama that Bryan Singer was able to bring to this silly little comic book movie was pretty impressive. Especially at the time, because at this time, comic book movies, they were getting no respect. They were still a little too afraid to go full yellow spandex yet, though.
What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
This film, X-Men, would open on July 14th, the year 2000, and would ultimately go on to make over $296 million worldwide. Finally, Bryan Singer would win a Saturn Award for Best Director, where the film X-Men also picked up awards for Best Science Fiction Film, among others. And had this superhero X-Men movie bombed, had it tanked, had it failed, had it flopped, even if it had just done okay, it is all but certain that there would be no Marvel Cinematic Universe. So if you like that MCU stuff, you can thank Bryan. And then Bryan Singer would return to the director's chair for what many still hail as one of the finest superhero films ever made, This one was called X2, X-Men United. This sequel was bigger and bolder in every way. Bryan Singer would take cues from Empire Strikes Back when it came to crafting the story, which is always a good idea. Ultimately, X2 would earn over $407 million worldwide, with Bryan Singer again being nominated for that Saturn Award for Best Director. With the massive success of the X-Men franchise, it was no surprise that 20th Century Fox wanted him to continue to sit in that director's chair. However, a different opportunity came along from a different superhero, and Bryan Singer would end up signing with Warner Brothers to take on Superman Returns, leaving those X-Men behind. That decision to abandon the X-Men for DC's Superman did not sit well with Fox, who subsequently canceled their production deal with Bryan Singer's company, Bad Hat Harry Productions. The movie Superman Returns would open with a solid 5-day gross of $84.6 million, but would quickly begin its decline when its second weekend gross dropped by 58%. Probably because everyone who went to go see it told everybody else that it was boring. I did like how they would honor and respect and connect to the Christopher Reeve Superman, but they didn't do anything good with it. Superman Returns would make just over $391 million worldwide off of a nearly $223 million budget, before marketing costs, which was ultimately seen as a disappointing figure for such a massive, anticipated intellectual property. It's frickin' Superman, it should have made more money, but it's frickin' Superman, so it's not supposed to be boring. After producing the cult classic Trick or Treat in the year 2007, Bryan Singer would return to the director's chair to tell a tale of Nazis with Tom Cruise, starring in the true story Valkyrie. This is a fascinating tale of the failed attempt to kill Hitler. They almost got him. The studio decided to release Valkyrie on Christmas Day 2008, where it actually opened to a solid $30 million, and would ultimately cap out at just over $201 million worldwide. After taking a little break, 20th Century Fox wanted to recapture the magic of the first two X-Men movies, and came crawling back to Bryan Singer about directing a new X-Men movie. Bryan Singer would write a treatment and give it to a writer to develop, which would ultimately become X-Men First Class. However, as the project took a while to get going, Singer had signed on to direct Jack the Giant Slayer. Its massive production budget was nearly 200 million buckaroos, and every buck was an uphill battle, and the film only made back 197 million worldwide. So what do when you have a film that is a financial disappointment? Well, you get back to familiar territory, and that familiar territory is full of mutants.
Go fuck yourself.
And after the massive success of X-Men First Class, Bryan Singer would take over directing duties from Matthew Vaughn, bringing us X-Men Days of Future Past, which would go on to become one of the best films in the X-Men franchise, and the most successful, with a $747.9 million gross worldwide. And yeah, it got the best reviews in the history of X-Men movies, with Bryan Singer picking up a Saturn Award nomination for Best Director. After producing the well-received horror film, The Taking of Deborah Logan, in 2014, Bryan Singer would step back behind the camera for X-Men Apocalypse. Sadly, this film would be called a franchise-killing disaster. X-Men Apocalypse was predicted to open with 80 million, yet only managed 65.8 million, before losing 66% of its audience in its second week. And yeah, X-Men Apocalypse, it's a mess of a movie that what's going on here? Nobody cares, and it just didn't make sense with anything. Despite all of that, the Saturn Award still nominated Bryan Singer for Best Director. And then came Bohemian Rhapsody, a movie that had more drama behind the camera than in front of it. Production on this highly anticipated Freddie Mercury biopic had begun in 2017, and it wouldn't be long before there were whispers and rumors about trouble on the set. Then, in December of 2017, it was reported that the production of the film had been temporarily suspended due to what was reported as quote-unquote temporary unavailability of director Bryan Singer, with it later being cleared up and reported that Bryan Singer simply did not want to return to set after Thanksgiving break. Bryan Singer had asked to suspend the production further as his mother was supposedly very ill. But at the time it was reported that people had become annoyed with Bryan Singer's behavior, as he was constantly late to set and had frequent clashes with future Oscar winner Rami Malek. And with only 2 weeks left of production, Bryan Singer was formally fired from the film, with director Dexter Fletcher stepping in as his replacement. Despite Fletcher completing the film, the DGA ruled that Singer had done enough to retain the sole director credit. But by that time, the wheels were off of the bus. This once praised and respected director was now making headlines not for his movies, but for his bad behavior. But the thing is, his bad behavior had actually been a bit of a very well-known secret in Hollywood. Like, even I knew this guy was up to some sketchy stuff. But the cast and crew of Bohemian Rhapsody was like, "What? We had no idea. What?" I'm like, "Yeah, y'all knew. Everybody knew what he was doing, but it was, a time when they could get away with that shit." So yeah, before we get started on the horrible, abusive history of Bryan Singer, we should point out that Bryan Singer denies all allegations leveled against him, and has never faced any criminal charges stemming from any allegation. So I know it's hard to do this on the internet now, but yeah, innocent until proven guilty. But there is a lot of sketchy stuff. Only a few days after Bryan Singer was fired from the film, a lawsuit was filed against the director that accused him of sexually assaulting a minor in the year 2003. From there, the floodgates would open, and more abuse allegations were reported, including ones that had not been private, but were there for anyone to see if they were looking, including a 1997 lawsuit that accused Bryan Singer of tricking underage children to film a nude shower scene on the set of Apt Pupil. WTF. In 2014, Bryan Singer was sued by former child star Michael Egan III, who claimed that the director drugged and raped him in Hawaii. Singer calls the claims outrageous and false, as it turns out that he was right, and Bryan Singer's attorney was able to prove to the courts with documents that proved that neither party was even in Hawaii at the time of the events were to have allegedly taken place. Later that year, Bryan Singer and producer Gary Goddard were accused of raping a minor at the London premiere of Superman Returns, with the case being dismissed at the accuser's request shortly after. But the reports of Singer's notorious sex-filled parties were no secret. It was at these wild and crazy parties where many of these allegations of sexual assault of minors took place. There were always young boys around Bryan, and it was always uncomfortable. And something just always felt off about it, in a sinister kind of way. In January of 2019, an investigative report by The Atlantic would tell the story of 4 men who accused Bryan Singer of sexual assault. Bryan Singer would call the article homophobic, while associations like GLAAD distanced themselves from Bryan Singer and his film Bohemian Rhapsody, saying that he wrongfully used homophobia to deflect from sexual assault allegations. Other organizations would follow suit, removing Bryan Singer's name from any nominations associated with the film Bohemian Rhapsody. while other projects Bryan Singer had in development, such as a remake of Red Sonja, were shelved. Nobody wanted to make a movie with Bryan Singer anymore. But it wouldn't be just Singer's alleged sexual endeavors that made headlines, but his general nasty behavior on set. He would constantly get into arguments with producers and stars of his films. Like there was one time Halle Berry walked off set, and Jennifer Lawrence said that Bryan Singer had one of the biggest hissy fits she'd ever seen. And I'm sure J-Law has seen her fair share of hissy fits. So where the f*** is Bryan Singer now? He certainly took time off to let the noise die down surrounding those multiple allegations made against him, but it appears that he is now ready to make a comeback. But are we ready? Are you? The filmmaker has reportedly been living/hiding in Israel, where he's working on 3 films set in or related to the country, and has reportedly been searching for funding without the aid of an agent, while he's also planning to do a documentary about himself and the allegations leveled against him, and the quote-unquote struggles he has faced in the aftermath. Whether any of these projects see the light of day is still up in the air, but it would appear that after years away from the spotlight, Bryan Singer is ready to make his comeback. But the question is, are we? So yeah, you know what, it's okay to give a fuck about what the fuck happened to Bryan Singer because, you know, there's a lesson there, and that lesson is don't do bad things, especially with minors.